Namaste and in la catch, and welcome to another episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and as always, we need to remember what those two phrases, where they come from and what they mean. Namaste comes from the Sanskrit spoken, it's called Brahmi, and it simply means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. In la catch, on the other hand, comes from the Mayan, and it means I am another you. So imagine that if when you're greeting someone and just thinking about it on your daily passage through life, right? The difference that that kind of awareness would make. Great. Okay, so this episode's guest is Kosta. Oh gosh, I almost said Makreas, but it's Makreas, right?
Makreas.
Yeah. Makreas. He sometimes goes by Gus, but Kosta has been an acquaintance of mine for quite some time, and we've had a couple of chats together. By day, he is a quality assurance engineer and analyst. He's a computer programmer. And his passion, though, is he's the founder of ET Let's Talk. And what that is about, we'll get into in just a little bit, but it kind of gives you just the idea by the name. He also is the founder of, one of the co-founders of the People's Disclosure Movement, the People's Love Alliance, and the Global CE5 Initiative. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. He's also an international networker and has quite a large group. He's built a wonderful environment for people to come and enjoy each other and share their experiences called etletstalk.org. And I'll have that link in the description at the end. Other than that, Kosta, man, it's great to have you here finally.
Thank you very much, Zen. It's a pleasure to be here and to basically continue our conversations, with gaps in between of a few years, but nonetheless very strong and vital ones.
Well, isn't life about cycles and spirals and patterns and processes, and we all have them. We just may not all recognize them when they come. Right.
And also time is just a sequence of brain states. So the fact that we've maintained our connection in the way that we've maintained our connection with all the people that mean something in our lives, I like to say it's just a matter of time, which doesn't exist. So that means that we're always connected then.
Well, according to Wilbert, I was going to mention this later, but since you bring the concept of time up now, I'm sure you're familiar with Wilbert Smith's material, that he was Canada's Ministry of Transportation Director of Project Magnet, which was Canada's UFO investigation in the 1950s. And he had conversations with a little more in the CE5 type, right? But he had some memoirs that weren't published until 2 years after his death. So I don't know if he intended them for public view or not. But one of the things that they had told him, he called them people from elsewhere, was that time to them is a measurement in the change of entropy. I found that fascinating.
I love the definition on a certain level, and yet my mind cannot wrap itself around what that would be like. But that's okay, because we are creatures of another kind of valuation of time. So we necessarily wouldn't be able to map ourselves to.
And maybe someday we will, as we advance in our own consciousness and understanding, which obviously much beyond us. Speaking of beyond us, let's go back and step in the Wayback Machine for just a moment and see if we can find Sherman and Peabody. Right?
That dates us,
doesn't it? Though?
Yes, they were my heroes. Many hours spent as a youngster, just enjoying those two.
Absolutely,
on TV.
So when you first, and obviously you've been interested in this field in metaphysics and ufology, and it's now called ufology. It wasn't for a long time. When did you first begin to notice your fascination and your curiosity with those topics? What happened to you that brought
Something,
that into your awareness?
yeah. Well, there was something that preceded all that that led to a moment of, aha, this is it. I love it. And what I'm talking about is what preceded as a child for me was, I can remember in grade school devouring all the science fiction books I could find. We would have a little mobile library that would drive up to our grade school, and they would parade our classes outside and allow us to go into the library and pick what we liked. And I had two topics that fascinated me: sports, found all the baseball and football books I could find, and all the science fiction that was available. So I read a lot of that and was just thrilled by the words in the page that would come to life for me by very talented writers of the day, people like Ray Bradbury and Poul Anderson and Isaac Asimov and many others.
Right.
Just expanded and created pictures in my mind of a wider universe that I loved. Couldn't devour enough of it.
Isn't it interesting how the words on a page,
oh yeah,
when you kind of give yourself to them, they just create this whole other world that you become immersed for a while. Yeah,
multiple ones. So at age 11, I had a paper route. I saved my money and I got a 3.5-inch reflector telescope, and I was there in my backyard in Indiana on summer and winter nights when I could, gazing at the stars, and just looking up in wonder at them, and just feeling like a real tug, a real awe, and just loving to feel like I was part of something vast and infinite. As small as I felt, it just was a comfort to know that there was this wide universe. Sure. And I would imagine what life there might be out there, on those far-flung, stars and planets and all that the science fiction books had already lighted my imagination for. Yeah. So I had the telescope, and then growing up in the 60s, there were the moonshots, and there was I remember when the first Russian man went into space, the first American.
Yuri Gagarin.
Yes, I didn't know how to pronounce it, but I can spell it, and thank you for that. Wow. And then, the US, freaked out, had already freaked out over Sputnik and the satellite thing. So that era began mechanized and manned space flight for us. And regardless of what—
that was our next door neighbor. You and I are both from Indiana originally. A couple of Hoosiers, took us a while to reconnect. But John Glenn was from Ohio, right?
Right. So all this was local, and eventually later from Wapakoneta, Neil Armstrong, also from Ohio. So there was the manned space stuff. I mean, really the first foray of Russia, and particularly then the US, to the moon, to the moon and back, as they say. And that captured not only my imagination, but at the time, the whole world was enamored of the—
I kind of like hanging out there myself.
Were you orbiting? Was that you that I saw in my telescope?
Well, I'm kind of looking at the Earth from here now, or it's in the background. So
that's true. So I'm not sure really where you are. I thought you might be a studio, but wait a minute, you could be like orbiting at the moment, the moon.
Edgar Mitchell meant a great deal to me, and I think he actually took this picture. So it was. It seemed fitting, especially with the show. One World in a New World gives us a different perspective, looking at us from afar.
That's perfect. So to finally answer your question, after all the background, I might have been 11, might have been 12, and I went and was looking at the new paperbacks at my local drugstore where they had, these little merry-go-rounds of books, and one caught my attention. It had a picture of a classic 50s picture of a dome-shaped with a cupola UFO. And it was written by, I'm sure, one of the contactee members of the contactee movement, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and so on. I don't remember who, but I tell you, it had a lot of glossy pictures taken by the author or others like him of UFO shots, classic stuff that, you can find on the internet now.
Right.
Assuredly, some of that may have been, probably was fake, because there were a lot of people faking things. However, in the mix of all that, I really felt like people had captured something, and I was smitten.
One or two slid through.
What's that?
I say one or two slid through.
One or two, probably hundreds slid through. Yeah, so I was smitten and read all that I could. There was UFO magazine, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was the moment. I remember being in the drugstore and my eyes falling on that book and suddenly realizing, oh my God, I really do believe they are here. People are photographing them. People are having experiences. And this was like the completion of things. Not only did I then just be able to look far away under the stars, but now it became personal because these books and these photos were telling me, well, they're here. Some people had met them on the ground, but they were in our skies. So that kind of completed the circuit. It wasn't something unreachable. Those civilizations had found a way to come to us. And that to me was the opening of a new chapter in my life. I wanted more. But as we continue talking and I bore you with the rest of my life, I held on to that interest for a while, but then went on to have what I call a pretty conventional kind of life for a young guy from the Midwest in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, OOs, and beyond.
That's way back. I have to admit, even for me growing up in that time, and I had some direct experiences that I didn't realize what they were until later. Going into those more conventional lifestyles was kind of the only possibility that we had at the time, because this topic certainly wasn't all that well received, and those that did get into it were often kind of ostracized. And still maybe a little bit today, but not near as much. I had a similar thing with you, only I 8 years old, I started having these dreams. I'd wake up in bed looking at my body. I'd watch my body climb out of bed, walk across the neighbor's backyard, climb a fence, go into this cow pasture. It was a 10-acre pasture. And I'd start rising up into the air, and I'd look up and there was an orange cigar-shaped cloud that must have been a mile long. And these things happened twice a month for almost 2 years, or right about that time. And then right before moving to Arizona, I was walking through a bookstore in Muncie, Indiana, just a few miles from where I grew up, and this book falls off the shelf.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody around. You've had that kind of experience.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's kind of eerie, right? Until you get used to it. And then,
yeah.
Oh, cool. Another one. All right. So this book falls off the shelf, opens on the floor, covers up. I walk over, and it's Ruth Montgomery's Strangers Among Us. And I pick it up and I turn it over, and the first paragraph that I read says that the most common contactee experiences in the Midwest in the late 50s and early 60s was the orange cigar-shaped cloud.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, and I hadn't thought about it until that moment. And then all these things come flooding back. It's like, wow, okay, what else, right? So, and I'm sure that with you and your curiosity, where did it take you in the later years of your life, and how did you deal with the two questions, right? Where did it take you, and how did you deal with the internal things that were going on, and being able to articulate what was happening and have it understood, or at least have some kind of audience or listening from others?
I tell you, during the conventional parts of my life, and by that what I mean is I went to university, got a degree in computer science, minor in mathematics, and came out to California, got a job in the San Francisco Bay Area, and worked in the Silicon Valley until my retirement, actually in 2014, as a software engineer.
Congratulations on the retirement, by the way.
Oh yeah, it's 7 years now, and that's a nice number, sure. 7, which allows me to be doing what I'm doing right now full time. But during those years, I maintained my interest by loving to watch science fiction movies that came along. Sadly, back then, as probably now, Hollywood was producing a lot of the creepy, scary, aliens are coming here to eat us, or take our women, or take our men, or take our lawnmowers, whatever they thought would really scare us.
Right.
But I still, watched all that stuff and kept my finger in it.
Well, it's funny
But
how that's trickled through in the consciousness of most of humanity, to where there still is that reticence to be open, and there's this fear of
the
what might
other.
happen. Yeah.
But we're changing that, and that's part of what I hope to be talking about in our conversation here. How, I mean, you nailed it right there. So true. And the thing is, it doesn't have to stay that way, and it hasn't been staying that way, and it's changing more for the positive, and we can expand on that.
And I
But to
think right
answer,
now we have a golden opportunity up close and personal with the conditions that we're having to face now, where we're being taught to be afraid of each other. And now we have to get over that en masse in order to move forward and learn how to work together.
and that's intertwined. Not only have we been taught to fear the other coming from outer space, but like you say, we're in a position now where we're taught to fear the other who's next door, because their skin is different, their language is different, their practices are different, whatever. The challenge is we have to fix our relations here on Earth, as well as fix our relations with those from the stars that clearly see that is our issue. But they're here to help. And again, I can talk more about that because they have gone this same road and have conquered the lower aspects of themselves, the ones that we're in contact with have, and learn to get along in harmony and go to the stars and come and therefore find other civilizations like ours that might need a little helping hand or a little more understanding about how important it is to start getting along. Otherwise, we perish together.
Right.
And that's where we are these days.
Yeah. And has been there for a while too. My first article I wrote about it was 1988. Just looking at, okay, why would, a more advanced race want to deal with a bunch of barbarians, other than to, hey, guys, there's a better way, right? And
that's it.
We can help you, but you got to take care of your own mess first.
Well, if you're the monitor on the playground and you're watching the fifth graders getting into fist fights over who owns the kickball that they've been playing with,
right,
over what is silly stuff or can be really silly stuff, you can't do your growing for them, but you can go in, separate them, and try to give them some kind of advice or an offer to mediate or something. There is something you, as the one who's gone through that phase, do have to offer without doing the work for them, but just assisting them along the way to do the internal work themselves and learn how to get along. And it sounds like a little bit like a flippant remark I'm making, but about the playground and all that. But on the other hand, that is what we must seem like. And the problem is the little kickballs that I was using in my example here are nuclear weapons.
right.
And those toys, those big nuclear toys we have huge consequences if they get mishandled or if accidents happen. I welcome the other civilizations to come and do what they can,
absolutely,
per our request and with our free will, to help us along that road to get over that destructive scenario that we can be in. And let me just say, and I'm not a pessimist or anything, I'm a cautious optimist, so I'm not trying to spread any doom and gloom here, just acknowledging, like anybody who looks at the news and is aware of the world situation, just acknowledging where we are. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge the human spirit and the potential that we have to make things right between ourselves, to establish right human relations, and to literally create a golden age on Earth if we want it.
And I think it's part of what we need to do. I mean, we've grown population-wise. We've grown from little, small tribes, villages, to then regions and states, nations, and now here we are, a global village, or at least on the cusp of becoming that. Jeff Michelab had mentioned that once one of his friends that is in contact had said that they see us as a bunch of alpha males competing with each other.
Yeah.
In silos. And that what they're hoping will happen is that that lower, kind of a groundswell will take place where there's this shift in attitude, like we're talking about, where that fear of others goes away and it turns into some kind of a more of an embracing of each other, and learning about each other rather than fearing each other, because that's usually the essence of the fears. We don't know. Well, when we find out and discover, hey, these people feel and think pretty much the same. The cultures may be different, different types of traditions and things like that, but the basic people are pretty much all the same.
And that is our common humanity. We need to, I agree with you that we need to emphasize that, expand it everywhere, and teach it, especially to the younger generations, because basically most of the time you have to teach separation and hatred and division to young children. I'm thinking like Nazi Germany as just one example, not to pick on Germany, but that's what those in charge back then did. Hitler and his marshals, is they got them young and educated them in the ways of them being superior and being in charge and
so they know
dominating. Yeah, and anyway, so great education is needed, and it is going on the earth, and we have to acknowledge and find it, because the mass media doesn't reflect a lot of that to us now.
No, it doesn't. But you make a great point that the instruction that kids get, and so they don't necessarily know any better, because we don't really teach those deeper critical thinking skills, deductive logic, and things like that till college, when those should be some of the things that kids develop young so that they can think for themselves. We don't, our system doesn't necessarily allow that, because we're, as a teacher, I was in boxes with 50 kids, and there was only so much you could do in that box.
Yeah. I agree. We need to overhaul that. I realized I didn't answer the second part of your previous question. I don't like to leave things hanging.
I was going to head back there.
And I let me give it a try, and let me see if I actually do answer it, or if I am kind of misremembering it.
Okay.
I think you asked me kind of really, how did this affect the rest of my life? What were
what happened in that process of becoming aware of that and noticing the difference in others, and how did you bridge that? What kinds of conversations did you have that allowed that to take place effectively?
Well, all my life, and again, because I grew up in the 60s and 70s, where some of the greatest United States social movements were born. And I was a young activist in my teen years and beyond, in one cause or another, whether it was the anti-Vietnam War, or whether it was actually learn to be a feminist, the women's movement, or the movement for Native American rights, lots of movements. And so part of my fabric of my soul was to reach out to others already as a young person and try to build bridges and build movements to make things better for societies as a whole. So again, that was bred in me. It's still in me, and that's why we're having this conversation. So along the way, I was always involved in either some self-initiated project or somebody else's movement, doing my part, playing a role, trying to make the world a better place in one way or another. So that's how my entire adult life was affected, despite the fact I was working, in a regular job as a software engineer, getting married, having kids, getting divorced, getting remarried. Still at my core was always this activist who needed a mission, a role to play, and was always finding something to be involved in, again, that I thought would make the world a better place, a positive contribution.
I am totally hip to that.
Yeah. So, and that's why what happened in 2006, then, the culmination of that was the experience I had for a week making my first contact with, they like to be called star people. I call them ETs too, which is technically correct, but I don't call them aliens. They don't like that. or they prefer rather star people or star friends, star family. And I had encounters
with how the natives call it, the indigenous refer to them.
Yes. Yeah. And there's a good reason for that.
Oh, yeah.
But there was a week in September there in 2006 here in Northern California at Mount Shasta where a number of experiences up close and personal happened to not only others, but to me, which brought me in contact with our star friends and changed the course of my life, even though I continued after that week to work normally and like everybody else does and pay the bills and whatnot. I started to work part-time and increasingly more and more to what I'm doing full-time now is what happened. But I started to work more in that area of contact with our star friends. And it was just wonderful. I can tell you a little bit more about the details of that week because they were, for me, mind-blowing and life-changing, or not, depending on what direction you want to go in.
Well, yeah, it definitely can be mind-blowing and a little freaky at times too. So what was it that, what kind of communication took place and what changed in your awareness as a result? I think that's probably one of the most critical things, right? Yeah.
We were learning, and I was with a group of 40 people, how to make the close encounters of the fifth kind contact, which is the human-initiated, interactive communication with star civilizations, with star people. So we were practicing that and spending nights under the sky, the dark sky, and actually seeing the results of our meditation efforts using consciousness as a group to reach out to them in thought and with our hearts, and they would respond. We learned to see the flashing, zigzagging lights in the sky responding to the lights we flashed at them back and forth, or we would see the orbs in the trees, all kinds of experiences that week that the group was having. But there were 3 experiences that I had up close and personal that just emphasized, you know, the whole thing and just put a real exclamation point on it. One of them was that I had the habit of talking to my wife every morning, telling her what we experienced the night before, because before leaving for that 6 days to make this contact, I had conflicting feelings. I was excited. I had never heard before that you could actually do this, not just passively wait and maybe see a UFO, because I had plenty of stories from people I knew and trusted to whom that had happened, and I believed them, you know. But the fact you could do it yourself was new. So I left for those 6 days going, I want to try this. But the other part of me was the part that Hollywood had already programmed for years, which was be afraid, be very afraid. So with a little trepidation, but a lot of excitement, I went, right? Kind of mixed. And the experiences I had there, the up close and personal ones, happened in such a gentle way that I realized they were engineered in the most comfortable way for me to not be afraid, to not like run away with my hair on fire and all that. So for me, they happened in the most perfect, mind-blowing, box opening kind of way.
Kind of a soft invitation for the curious.
Yes. And every person has their own limits, what scares them, what they can handle. And I think these were, like, again, like I said, were engineered to deal with my limits so that I could accept them. And I'm grateful for that, for those that did it. But anyway, before I left for these 6 days with this excitement and some fear, I said to my wife, or I asked her, why don't you come with me? And she says, you know, I was a kind of a NASA geek when I was a kid. I was into the space program and stuff, but I really wasn't into science fiction or astronomy or caring about the larger universe. And I've got several businesses because she's an entrepreneur. She had businesses to run and bills to pay and all that. And she said, go have fun. I support what you're doing, and I believe that the universe being very large, I believe that they're here and that there is life. But I don't see what it has to do with me personally. I have businesses to run, but I support you. So that was great. Not all couples have that kind of agreement.
Absolutely. That was a real blessing to have that kind of understanding and support in that, my metaphysical meanderings, I scared the bejeebers out of my first wife. And it was, I do too, right? But that doesn't eliminate those things in my own life. You can't deny them once they begin happening.
That's true. You have to be true to yourself in the end.
Yeah.
So to make the long story short, with her support, she said, "Go have fun," but I don't see what it has to do with me. I went, was having fun, meeting new friends, seeing things in the sky, learning how to recognize what we could put a label on. Hey, it's a plane, it's a satellite, it's a star, it's this and that. And what we couldn't put a label on that was responding to us in different ways. And that was the excitement of it. So I was calling her every morning, telling her about the previous night's activity, excited like a fifth grader. Oh my God, you should have seen this. This happened, that happened.
Right.
And about the fourth morning, she stops me just before I could start, my little narrative about the night before. And she says, "Wait a minute, I have some story to tell you." And I thought to myself immediately, what could be cooler than what happened to me last night? What an ego thing, right? And I laugh at myself now, but it was an honest reaction. Like, I'm about to lay all this stuff on her and she's got something. Okay, please tell me. I'm all ears. Oh boy. In our bedroom, not 20 feet from where I'm sitting right now, the night before, she had just turned out the lights, was slinking down into the bed, getting comfortable. And you have to understand, she's a professional clairvoyant and has been all of her life. And so she has an inner clairvoyant sight. But what I'm about to describe happened with her outer eyes, and she has excellent night vision like a bat. So this was not a psychic thing that she saw. It was literally with her eyes open. As she's getting ready, like I said, to scooch down and close her eyes and go to sleep, suddenly at the end of the bed, boom, there are 4, maybe 5 figures standing there. They are translucent, white, about 3.5, 4 feet tall. They have big heads, big eyes. Couldn't make out the features here, but she thought there might have been a mouth. 2 arms, and she couldn't see their legs. She could see their torso, but they were at the end of the bed, and so the end of the bed was hiding the lower parts of what she assumed were bipedal bodies.
Right.
So that says to me, this was not like a projection. They were there in the physical reality because something physical like the bed was actually hiding the lower part of them. So there are these 4, maybe 5, once in the back behind the others, beings sitting there staring at her. And she was just shocked because, again, she was not the person she doesn't have a great imagination in this way, doesn't care about science fiction and fantasy. And yet there was this in front of her, and she was not afraid at all. She was speechless as they stared at her, and she could hear in her mind their thoughts. And they were saying to her in this sing-song fashion, they were going, "Who are you? Who are you?" And we realize today that we believe they had found me up at Mount Shasta. And because of my strong energy connection, like anybody in a relationship has, they probably saw this energy linkage going back to somewhere, and maybe they had some spare time. They decided to follow the energy to the other end, to our bedroom, and they found her. And so this was just a really curious, "Who are you?" And she felt these waves of love coming off of them, and that's why she wasn't afraid.
Right.
Again, she was shocked into speechlessness, but there was this love enveloping her. And finally, she got it together to think to them, "Where are you from?"
Yeah. Who are you?
Yeah, well, yeah, who are you? Where are you from? And being she had a civil engineering degree from Princeton and an MBA from Harvard, so she was very much a scholastically minded person. She says to herself years later, the first thing I should have asked them was, "How'd you get here?" The engineer in her would like, "How'd you get here?"
Right.
But no, it was like, it could have been something even worse. She could have said like, "What's your sign?" No. No. But she said, "Where are you from?" And then she heard, again in a sing-song fashion, the answer came through her thoughts. Arcturus. Now, because my wife Hollis had never been really technically into astronomy, she didn't know all of the stuff that I had learned when I was 10, and into astronomy, that Arcturus is what they call a hypergiant now. I believe a red hypergiant. It's a star. So she says to me, Arcturus, is that a place? I go, oh, yeah. That's astronomy 101. It's a hyper red giant. It's a star system. So they're telling you they're Arcturians. She goes, okay. And then they slowly started fading away, and then they were gone. And if you know her, instead of being afraid or unable to sleep or whatever, or turning out all the lights, some people would, she just went to sleep and kept it to herself till the following morning. And so I, who thought I had the coolest stories around, suddenly I'm sitting there, as they say, my jaw dropped as I'm listening to this.
And now you're envious.
So I'm going, okay, you win that one. That is an awesome story. And then she said to me, okay, that's a place. Now it's personal to me. It's personal. They were here. Can I come with you next year? And we've been together on this journey ever since then, because they made it personal. And during interviews, I always like to thank them wherever they are, if they're listening in, to thank those Arcturians, because they deliberately made it personal to her, to my significant other, in a way that mattered,
right,
to help her realize the universe is as big as she thought, and it actually had eyes and had thoughts and had bodies. And so, yes, it was personal. And she joined me in this exploration that we've been doing.
Well, to me, that makes perfect sense, right? I understand, at least to some degree, that thoughts and feelings and words are all vibrations, and that these advanced races have developed their sensitivity far beyond ours. We think of, for instance, we have 5 senses using 10% of our brain. That's kind of an accepted axiom, right? Well, what about the other 90%? And if you do a simple ratio, could we have 45 more senses with that? Or are those 5 distributed similarly in those other 9, perhaps, planes? And William Swigert had a technique called multiplane awareness that kind of lends itself to that. And then you have the solfeggio frequencies that also are 9 that are in tune with that as well. So here's these different systems and patterns that are coming together, and it comes back into that awareness that when you, kind of like the where 2 or more gathered thing, right? Yeah. Where you are, and when you're tightly connected with someone, there are links, whether it's energy, whether it's, silver chords or frequencies or whatever. We don't have the capacity to really understand the exactness of the details of that, but we can understand the concept of it, especially when the synchronicities like that are involved, where you've got something pretty much similar going on in 2 different places. Now, that takes us into the ability of living in quantum entanglement in the unified field, right? I think that's part of my personal feeling, is that's part of what they're drawing us into, is to understand that more deeply. Would you agree?
I agree, because there's the phrase that we toss around in our community, sometimes almost very glibly, but it still is important and profound, and that is, we are one. There is one mind, one consciousness in the universe, and we are all, I believe, fractal parts of it, but there is one mind. And if that's true, it's the ultimate entanglement. It means that every time, every space that we could conceive of or not even conceive of is all folded within us and accessible to us, if we know and accept the fact that we can open up and touch any time and space and place that we want. Absolutely. I truly believe that it's all within there. And I think our star friends have achieved some of that. And I believe it's to their delight as they see us.
Absolutely.
Those possibilities and wanting to explore the extra senses that we have.
Well, and like you were saying earlier, we've got the the young programming, right, that keeps us in a separate place, that we don't necessarily understand the concept of oneness. And when we do first hear it, it's like this woo-woo kind of thing. And it's like, well, how does it all fit? Well, as you begin to break it down or quantize it, if you will, it doesn't change the aspects of the individuation of consciousness in these forms. It's like the NDE that I had in college at Ball State in Indiana, as a matter of fact. I came back with the understanding that we are cosmic consciousness condensed into form. We don't necessarily know how to expand on that or how to go back home yet, right? But we have that point of light that bounces back and forth between the body and the great light in different incarnations. And now comes a time where when we begin to understand that and understand the science a little bit deeper, that it echoes what the sages have been saying, in that everything is one, we're all connected, and each of us, more than likely, have that perfected form, fit, and function in the world that we aren't necessarily aware of yet. And that may be, from my engagement with them, kind of where they're leading us to look inside to find where that is.
And they're here to lend a helping hand for that.
Absolutely.
They see the promise within us, even if many of us are asleep and don't see that promise, and others are just partially awakening, and maybe some are fully awakened. The promise is the same, and it will get revealed. I remember in 2010, 4 years after I had the experience I was mentioning to you during that week, and a couple other experiences, which I might get to, that had the effect of blowing my mind open. And really realizing the beauty and the synchronicity that you mentioned. But in 2010, I had communication with my star friends through the help of my wife, who is a good communicator telepathically. And I asked them if it, in their larger plans, if it would be useful for them to organize people like myself all over the planet who were learning to make this personalized direct contact with them, whether it would be worthwhile to organize people and get them together, even virtually on the internet, to make a unified group approach, to them. And they said, oh, absolutely. First of all, we would like you not to think of us not as gods, because human beings would, right. This is not a dig at religion, but people have used religion in order for us to slaughter one another, because my God's better than your God, kind of thing. Right. So one of the first things my star friends said in this communication in 2010 was, don't think of us as gods, think of us as elder brothers, sisters, and cousins. We are family. And that set the stage. That helped me frame my relationship with them, which persists to this day. For me, they are, if not star friends, some of them family, bouncing around as that little cosmic light here, there, and everywhere. We have relationships all over, not just in human form on Earth. So they are family. And if anything, I want to instill that fact to your viewers here. They want to be known as star people and as star family. And in the same way that as you and I, let's say, are struggling with some kind of problem that we want to solve, and we hit a wall, we don't know how to solve it, we're frustrated, and then we find out we have a cousin in another country who reaches out to us and says, hey, did you know that we're related? I'm here. You got a problem? Anything I can help with? And then you say, okay, here's the problem, here's where I am, and then you get some advice, some guidance that might help. I'm using that as an analogy as to how they are reaching out to us from what they've told us, to be mentors, to guide us without doing the growing ourselves for us, but allowing us to do the growing ourselves, and yet providing guidance and mentorship according to our free will, because we need to ask. Right. They are there as family, as star friends, to help us.
They're a lot more subtle in their communications than our regular families are, right? They do have that respect, at least from what my experience is, and others that I know, like you, the subtle impressions that we get. They don't beat us over the head with a sledgehammer or slap us upside the head with a cosmic tube before if we make mistakes. That's our doing. What they do is that they will either communicate in some fashion, whether it's a subtle impression energetically, or a thought, or an image,
Yeah.
or even a series of words, the sing-song kind of stuff, because they don't intend to offend or frighten. And again, that part of it's on us as well. Speaking of the frightening part of, there's a lot of stories of those that have had horrible experiences, right? I haven't personally, and most of my friends have never. I'd see it a different way because I understand their methodology, and it's not frightening. But to someone who isn't prepared, it can be scary. How have you had any of those kind of folks that have gotten over their fear, or even talked about the experiences that they've had that were not the best, that they're trying to understand?
Well, I was one of those. Like I say, I approached my first experiences with fear, and then I had a gentle introduction during that week of contact that has eliminated the fear. And in the community where I've been a facilitator at etletstalk.com, I hear lots of stories from veterans and newcomers to this contact, and they run the gamut. A lot of them are people who were not prepared, and I've heard those stories, but who later on in their lives, reflected on experiences that they had that might have been, that were frightening as a child, let's say, and yet realizing they weren't harmed at all. It was just the unknown and not being prepared for something that put them in fear, and that's quite natural.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that I found is, again, talking to those and walking them through the process of going back and just asking questions. Well, yeah, you were afraid, right? Yeah, and you were scared, but were you harmed in any way? You know, and 99.9% of the time they'll say, well, no.
There you go. It was just your reactions.
And those wheels begin to turn, and they realize, oh, okay, so maybe that wasn't so bad. And it's all in how we see things. It's a perspective that we take, whether it's, being able to walk around the circle and look at things from multiple points, or in the case of what we're talking about, maybe having more of a atmospheric response where you're looking into a much greater awareness and connectivity.
Yeah, you're right. I don't know if you've heard of Ray Hernandez and his group, who created a research a few years ago that's still vital, with more than 4,000 people asking. Right.
I spent the weekend with Ray at the International UFO Congress here in
there you go.
Mountain Hills.
He and his group of scientists, an esteemed bunch, produced that most voluminous study of those 4,000 people who'd had contact experiences of all kind. Now, admittedly, this included what we term paranormal experiences, ESP, NDEs, OOBs, contact with extraterrestrials, etc. Now, in the aggregate, their statistics showed that I believe it was 85% of all these respondents reported that their experience was positive, or at the worst neutral. And that left maybe, I guess, 15% that were not described that way. Someday when you get a chance to interview Ray again, you can ask about that 15%, because I think that in that group must have been a whole bunch of people who just didn't understand what was happening. They weren't actually harmed, but it was something strange and unexpected that did put them in the fear, so that they could come back and say, well, no, it wasn't positive. I was afraid. But we have to keep in mind that
I was just going to say, realistically, it takes years sometimes to work through all of that. So don't expect for it to happen overnight, if by chance something's happened to you as a viewer.
Oh, absolutely. And this changes upside down the abduction thing. And this is one thing I've learned from Ray and from this particular study, in that using the word abduction is such a negative, fearful thing to begin with. His statistics just flip all that on its, upside down. If 5% of the people there said that it was positive or neutral, how can you say that was an abduction, in a negative way that was harmful and hurtful?
Right.
So I applaud the way he and his group have used the word experiencer more than an abductee.
Absolutely. I do too. It's great work. The book's actually called Beyond UFOs, and
Right.
I'll have that link included in the description
okay.
below. So they've really done some fantastic work.
Oh, it's about this thick. They've got the charts, the statistics.
They do. I've got a copy of it. He sent me one, and I've actually written a chapter for the new book, which you may have. Hasn't come out yet. I don't know if my chapter will end up in it or not. I think it's due out this. Well, it's supposed to be due out this October, so I don't know if
I see. Yeah,
come out yet or not. I know that they're with the situation with COVID, that was a challenge for them to get together and continue the work on it.
Yeah,
but it's great work, needed to be done.
Very much needed, quantified, so that we can talk with knowledge and with numbers to people who want to understand and who say, well, none of this has been documented. This is all hearsay. It's all anecdotal. Now we have, again, numbers and statistics.
Well, even so, we still need to consider that these are all subjective responses to the survey too. So subjectivity can offer some confabulation as well as just missing the mark entirely with what people want to report. But by and large, when you've got that many people reporting and there's that much data, there will be some trends, right, that come through. Yeah. It's fascinating.
It is, again, much needed, and we are in thankfulness and gratitude to them for doing all that deep dive.
Right.
Definitely.
Now, when you're meeting with these people now and they're needing some hand holding, right, which we all do from time to time, what do you find is the best or the most practical advice or situations that you can offer to them to help in their own process?
Because people's needs range, they're on a continuum. There is no one answer, but I try to listen to what it is their issue is. And let me say, I'm not a therapist. I'm not trained to be really good at this stuff, but I have learned in the 15 years I've been doing this that certain things come up over and over. So I've done some learning and gotten feedback on it. So there are things I can suggest to people, again, depending on what their issue is. Some people feel alone. They've kept an experience they had that was profound for them, but had no support. Or if they opened up their mouths, they got judged. Some of them institutionalized, some of them turned into black sheep, etc. What I can offer to those people, just as in one example, is, wow, we are a community. I can hopefully hook you up with, if not someone physically nearby who has a group, so that you can get together and find support and find camaraderie. Well, then at least on the internet, help you find other individuals who have similar stories, so that you can help each other.
Yeah. And the hookup will have no probing involved.
No probing involved at all. Yeah, that works.
The uncomfortable kind.
Oh, there's a comfortable kind? Oh, well, yeah. Of course, yeah. Yeah, my answer depends, and it always comes back to community. Whatever it is that they tell me that they have the problem with, somebody in the community has already been there or is there and can help them out. So, for example, in quite a few countries, I have some very activist members in this ET Let's Talk community who welcome people to their country. So I know that when I get a registration in my community on my website, for, say from someone from Canada or from the state of Florida or from England, where we really have a presence, or Japan, and I see the person is geographically there, I go, oh, okay, I'm going to send an introductory email to my 3 friends who have the network in that country. And these are people who are particularly welcoming, who have groups on social media, who have spawned CE5 groups all across their countries or their states. So I have a place to send people who need some help to others who have been down the road with them. And I know that they're in good hands because these are friends that I've vetted over time, and they trust me, I trust them, and we have created a safe community.
And that's 2 big factors right there: safety and trust.
Yeah, you don't get that all as much as you want in the regular world when you open your mouth and say, you know, I saw a UFO, for example. You don't, things have changed since I grew up, and you alluded to this at the beginning of our conversation, that it's gotten maybe better, and not maybe, it has gotten better. And depending on where you live in this country or in the world, there's more or less stigma you still have to work through.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's gotten any better. The community has grown. Those people have been able to find each other now so that they don't feel so alone, because the public response is often still the same if they don't have a direct experience of it.
Well, let me give you some statistics about the fact that you say it's gotten bigger. Not only has it gotten bigger, it always was big, but of course, when people don't talk about it, you never really know how to count them until they start opening their mouths or raising their hands, and then you go, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh my God, there's more than I imagined. Our People's Disclosure Movement, of which my community, ET Let's Talk, is one network within it. The People's Disclosure Movement is a network of networks that I founded that name and the concept of it in 2010 after a conversation with my star friends that I alluded to before. Within that movement, and I know this is an undercount, but it's the best that I could come up with, along with the help of an ally who actually helped me with this. We have 1 million people in more than 100 countries on the earth who are in the People's Disclosure Movement. These are people actively making their own contact now, or interested in it, or following it, but they are in that lane of us being a people's disclosure and not waiting for any government anywhere to make that announcement that so many are waiting for. Why give them that power? The power that we gave them for the last 70 years, they used to make us seem like we're crazy and to cover things up. So we flipped that on its head in the People's Disclosure Movement and decided we'll do the disclosing ourselves. We have the tools, this and this, to make contact, and then to find each other in this movement and realize that we have already disclosed that our friends from the stars are here. We don't need that announcement, that press release, whatever. We did the disclosure, which, by the way, my star friends said that we reached a tipping point with that disclosure in 2019. In that,
just in time.
Yeah. It's what they promised in 2010 when they said, please do organize people doing this. They told me back then, create as many ET contact teams as possible in as many places as possible, as quickly as possible. And someday, as more people see us in the skies and want to communicate with us, that gives us permission to appear in more places where even more people will see us. And that gives us permission to appear in even more places. So that's what they call the virtuous circle. It's an organic growth. And since 2010, that has been operating, and we're all over the world now doing this. And when I asked them in 2010, well, what's the purpose of doing that? They said, well, someday a tipping point will come where so many people all across the planet have seen us accept us, want to interact with us, that no government or institution of authority moving forward from that tipping point will ever again be able to cover us up, to lie, whatever, because the disclosure will be in the hands of the people and the authorities will have lost their credibility. So in that way, we, the people, own the future. We own the future of contact. It's in our hands now. And my star friends have said, it is, they gave me an image, it's a snowball rolling downhill that can't be stopped. And that's an important message I want to give to people listening here. We are part of the greatest movement in human history right now. It cannot be stopped. The tipping point was reached 2 years ago.
And just in time for everybody to go virtual with the restrictions, and seemingly that perfect timing. I said this to my wife, that at the beginning of the restrictions, that, you know, hopefully this obsession on self-hygiene and the sequestration will get people to turn inward and clean their acts up too, which is exactly what this activity, its ultimate goal, is to have that accomplished, and for the people to truly realize that, yes, they do hold the power individually and collectively, by agreement, not by command and control, which is what we've been used to. But there again, you know, we've got a lot of people tend to want to talk negatively about that and start pointing fingers and this and that and the other. Let's, you know, back it up a little bit and look at the span of time that we've had, and we are a planetary civilization that's evolving. And it, you know, it's kind of like somebody said, it came out of my mouth one time, you know, we ascend at the speed of surrender. Well, surrender doesn't necessarily, it's not a giving up, it's a giving to. And that giving to is to that, like you were talking earlier, it's to this place and this place, and even with the star people in the native ways as well, the indigenous, the third or the first brain, which is a gut, being able to feel and sense that. And I know you as a water baby, and me too, that's kind of what we do first, is we feel and then we let it process. It's not necessarily we think first and then, you know, shove it through. We let it rise up and have that series of questions that come up, or the queries or the curiosity, right?
And it's important that people have that curiosity and open-mindedness. You know, when new people come into the community, I ask them, you know, it's okay to have skepticism about this, as long as you have an open mind around it, that is willing to look at facts, at your experience, and willing to change. If you come in as a hard-headed person with the heart of a skeptic, nothing that ever happens will ever be good enough. It'll always be explained away, and we can't help you with that. But
nothing wrong with testing.
What's that?
The truth loves testing, because it's going to stand whatever it is.
That's a good point.
Question, the more it'll stand, the clearer it will become.
And it'll be true in many dimensions. Any place you try to knock on its door, it's still the truth. And sure, I tell people, experiment. We're an experimental community. I don't think any one of us, myself for sure, does not have all the answers to how many civilizations are here, to exactly what they're all thinking, to what their plans are. I do know from what I've been told through my own contacts that they're here because they love us. They see our potential. They see the danger we're in, but they see the potential that we can create the future we want with their help, if we agree to take it, and create a paradise on Earth. It won't happen overnight, but it's a process, as long as we're open to it and find others like us. And that's what the other thing that I founded, which was the People's Love Alliance, which is 1 billion hearts that have already opened on the Earth, if even just a little bit, from what my star friends tell me, that are people who see the possibilities of actually getting along and wanting harmony on the Earth. 1 billion of them. And the mass media won't reflect that to us. But if you go, if people go to Good News Every Day or to other websites and groups that feature good news that's happening around the world, you will see lots of evidence of people as individuals or in their aggregate doing kind and compassionate things to make the world a better place, whether it's to make our environment better, our relationships better, bring water to a village somewhere, bring peace to warring parties, on and on and on. There are light warriors, whether we call ourselves that or not, a billion, doing this in small and large ways. And the
Let me
People's
ask you a
Love
question
Alliance
that goes a little
all about
deeper.
that.
Do you think that there's a natural design within us that is emerging now with this call, and not just from the star people, but also from the needs on the planet right now, and moving out of this critical situation with some kind of beneficial results? And like you're saying, the aspect of harmony with self, with others, and with the planet. When we can achieve that, or at least have a notion toward that and ask questions about that, to me, that seems like a natural progression. So somehow it's got to be embedded within us.
I agree with you. I think it is embedded in us, and it primarily comes out of the human spirit. That spirit will not be held down forever, right? It can cover itself with materialism, with greed, with hate, and experience a lot of things in incarnation after incarnation as a result. But I believe that divine spark in us, and I don't want to get into labels of God this and God that. I believe that ultimately love is really what is a being in the universe. We're part of that. And that spark we have in us, to your point, Zen, will not be denied. And so I also think that our star friends are aware of that. And that's when I talk about the potential they see in us. Maybe with their perceptions beyond five senses, they could see that infinite flame of love within each of us that needs some fanning so that it gets bigger. So it's not just a pilot light,
Right.
It's become a wonderful consuming force for good. And I think they're here to help us, one, realize that, to fan those flames, join with others, and remake this planet, burn away through our flames the gross materialism and the greed and the hate that so far has defined humanity writ large throughout the centuries. But again, which we have the possibility to change right now.
Absolutely. And this is one of the reasons why I'm doing One World in a New World, is
Right.
to talk about this process in all kinds of different ways, and how others are doing that in the business world, the spiritual community, in the ET or the star people community. And look at a big picture, and we're all saying the same thing differently. And so I'm encouraged by that kind of collective and collaborative action, even if it's just with similar activity now in the ancillary groups, that it will eventually begin to find one another and have, like your group and other, even business groups and things like that, begin to come together and start integrating, communicating, figuring out, ways and methods to work together to have a better community.
And that's the promise of the internet, but before it became the thing that it is now, which is instantaneous communication anywhere in the world to those who have, a smartphone or a laptop or whatever. It was not as possible, but now we have no excuse. We can't say, I don't want to hook up with groups in the other part of the world that are doing good things because I can't. Well, you can. So it's a gift.
For those of us who have the blessing of access to technology.
Those of us who do it, and not everyone does, but it has been growing over the years. And those of us who have it have a responsibility to use it
wisely,
for good and wisely. And we are. That's why I mentioned that if you want to go to certain websites, I have a Facebook group, and not everyone's on Facebook, for understandable reasons. But if you check out Good News Every Day, I'm just one of the many groups there whose members post wonderful stories of compassion, kindness, where something bad gets turned into something better because of a person or a group. And that's our definition. And it's great to feed your soul in the morning when you're sitting with your coffee.
Absolutely.
And reading the headlines from mass media about the latest earthquake, war, tornado, whatever, and those things happen. We can't deny them, but we can choose to create something better. And by going to groups like Good News Every Day and reading even just half a dozen posts of people doing good things, man, this is like, in addition to having your beverage of the morning to get your physical body going, if that's what you do, you're also feeding your insides to get your morning and your day started with positive affirmations of human beings behaving well. And and that gets you started out on a good path. I recommend that to people.
Awesome. And I really appreciate that you mentioned that. I'll also include that link below. Our time has just flown, and I really appreciate you sharing the information and the stories and the invitation to move beyond constrictions, right? And to open up and look at things a little bit differently. Be aware and to share. Because that's
I ask people to do what's happened to you and us, you and me, and so many others, which is open your mind, and you will find we have a lot of, and I'm speaking metaphorically, a lot of hands reaching out from the inner dimensions as well as from the outer space. It's all inside anyway. The words are funny, but we have a lot of hands reaching out to help us, give a hand up, if we but ask. And that goes for humans around us as well as for the star people.
And once you ask, it's a mandate. It'll be there.
That's, I think that's the
way you want it, but it'll be there.
I agree with you. We have to choose, we have to ask, and not ignore the negativities, but choose to just use them as a jumping board and go, we can do better than this. Yeah. You see that? That's not so good. We can do better, and then start doing that and focusing on it. That's what the star people are asking us. As creators, we will mandate that these better things happen in our awareness for ourselves and for everybody else.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about all this, because it's close to my heart, and because I want people to know that we're not alone either on Earth with the numbers of people, the People's Love Alliance. We're all working, even though we may not know it, in our millions to build a better world, in the same way that we are reaching out in 1 million people now, the People's Disclosure Movement growing every day, reaching out to our star families to also build our future. The People's Love Alliance and the People's Disclosure Movement are one side of the same coin. Mm-hmm. We can't profess to want to have relationships with those out there if we're still beating up our neighbor because their skin color is different, and say, oh, you don't count, but the guy in that UFO counts, or the gal up there. Not true. We got to work on both ends of things. Yep. Love our human neighbors, love our cosmic neighbors. And so we're becoming cosmic humanity. And I want to leave one more statistic with your folks. 1.3 billion people, adults, research has shown, that was done about 5 years ago, 1.3 billion with a B, believe in intelligent star civilizations, not microbes under a rock somewhere, that they exist. Plus, they believe that we should contact them. So think about that. 1 out of 7 people on the planet, as you talk about numbers and what's acceptable, 1 out of 7 people on the planet, in theory, they're not all making contact, because some of them, half of them are looking for their next meal the next day. But in theory, they believe life exists, we should communicate. This is our low-hanging fruit for those of us. We don't have to convince others with the latest video that something exists. We should reach out to those who are already 1.3 billion in our group, let them know about us and that we make contact and welcome into our community, and we'll build it from there. And so I want to give that optimism to people, that there's many more of us believe in this and want to work with it than any of us ever realized.
It's that trifecta of faith, love, and trust.
Yeah, I like that. I'll put that on a t-shirt.
Cool. Kosta, thank you once again. I appreciate the time, and Namaste and in la catch. Thank you for joining us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and we'll see you next time.